March 5, 1944, Rechlin Airfield, Germany. The snow still covered the runways when the American fighter arrived. It wasn't flying, it was dragged, half dismantled, streaked with soot. The wreckage had been captured weeks earlier near Chartres, France. A Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, almost intact. German engineers surrounded the machine in silence. To them, it looked enormous, even grotesque, a steel beast, not an airplane. "Zu schwer," one muttered. Too heavy, but for Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche, one of the Luftwaffe's most skilled test pilots, the Thunderbolt was more than a curiosity. It was a question, and he wanted an answer. For months, German propaganda had mocked the P-47 as a flying bathtub. Yet Allied escort missions were growing deadlier, and many pilots swore that American fighters could dive faster than anything Germany built. The Reich wanted proof, and Lerche's job was to find it. He climbed the ladder and looked inside the cockpit. Everything was foreign: switches labeled in English, wide dials, heavy armor plates around the pilot's seat. But one thing caught his eye: the massive Pratt & Whitney Air 2800 engine. He ran his hand across the cowling. "This," he whispered, "is not a fighter, it's a fortress." For the next days, engineers worked to restore the Thunderbolt. American tools had to be improvised, parts modified, fuel recalibrated. Lerche studied the manuals captured with the plane. Tracing every system with the fascination of a scientist, by March 12, the aircraft stood ready, olive paint dull under gray skies, the white star of America still faintly visible beneath German markings. When the engine roared to life, the ground shook. Mechanics flinched. Lerche smiled. "So," he said quietly, "let's see what this beast can do." He didn't yet know that what he would discover in the coming days would haunt the Luftwaffe's confidence forever. March 13, 1944, Rechlin Airfield, Germany. A cold wind swept across the hangars as Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche climbed into the captured P-47. The mechanics stood at a distance. Nobody trusted the foreign monster. Its nose seemed too large, its fuselage too thick. It looked more like a tank than a fighter. When the massive Pratt & Whitney Air 2800 double Wasp engine started, the air shook. Dust and snow lifted from the ground. Even the hardened Luftwaffe crew stepped back. "It sounds like a bomber," one muttered. Lerche smiled. "No," he said through the radio, "it sounds like victory, theirs." He released the brakes. The aircraft rolled forward slowly at first, then faster. Heavier, until the wheels left the runway. For a moment, silence filled his helmet. The Thunderbolt climbed smoothly, almost arrogantly, ignoring its own weight. At 3,000 meters, Lerche pushed the throttle. The engine's roar deepened, and the plane surged ahead with brutal force. His instruments trembled, yet nothing failed. No vibrations, no shuddering wings, only raw, steady power. Then he began the real test. Nose down, full dive, the altimeter spun. At 800 km per hour, most German fighters began to tremble or break apart. The P-47 did not. It cut through the air like a falling anvil, solid, unstoppable. Lerche pulled back sharply. The controls were heavy, but responsive. When the dive ended, the aircraft climbed as if nothing had happened. He circled back to Rechlin, landing with perfect stability. When he stepped down, his face was pale but calm. "It shouldn't fly like that," he said quietly. "It's too big. Too heavy. And yet it does." The engineers rushed to his notes. Lerche wrote only one sentence: "It dives faster than any German aircraft and survives." The report reached Berlin within hours. It was the first crack in the Luftwaffe's belief that they still ruled the skies. March 15, 1944, Rechlin Test Center. After the first successful flight, the captured P-47 Thunderbolt became the most studied airplane in Germany. Every morning, engineers surrounded it with notebooks, cameras, and measuring tools. To them, it was an alien machine, crude in appearance but built with logic that defied their traditions. Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche began the second stage of testing, a full systems analysis. He climbed into the cockpit again and studied the details. The layout was simple, almost primitive: thick switches, oversized gauges, everything designed for speed, not elegance. German planes were crafted like watches, the P-47 felt like a factory tool. When he started the engine, the airfield trembled. The R-2800 didn't sound refined, it roared like industrial machinery. Yet it never faltered. Even at maximum power, the temperature held steady, oil pressure stable. Lerche scribbled in his logbook, no sign of stress. Overbuilt. He tested the armor next. Mechanics fired rifle rounds into spare panels taken from the fuselage. The bullets barely dented the surface. A mechanic shook his head. "Our FW-190's skin is half as thick," he said. Lerche then examined the radio. Its range was staggering, over 400 kilometers, clear and strong. Allied pilots could talk across fronts, German ones often lost contact beyond sight. He realized this alone gave the Americans an invisible edge. By sunset, his notes filled 10 pages. He stared at the aircraft, still gleaming under floodlights. It was not beautiful, but it was unstoppable. That night, in his private report, Lerche wrote, "The Americans build for the pilot's survival, not prestige. Their machines forgive mistakes. Ours punish them." The next morning, Berlin requested a full evaluation. What Lerche would send back would shake the Luftwaffe's faith in its own engineering. March 17, 1944, Rechlin Airfield, Germany. The day began with a rare order from Berlin: compare performance with FW-190A and Bf-109G, document all results. For Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche, it was the moment he'd been waiting for, a chance to measure the American bathtub against Germany's finest. At dawn, 2 German fighters stood ready beside the captured P-47 Thunderbolt. Mechanics adjusted propellers, filled tanks, and checked instruments. The Luftwaffe pilots joked loudly, confident that their sleek machines would humiliate the foreign brute. Lerche said nothing. He strapped in, sealed the canopy, and throttled forward. The test began with a climb. The Bf-109 leapt upward like a falcon. The Thunderbolt lumbered after it until, at 6,000 meters, something strange happened. The German fighter began to lose acceleration while the P-47 kept climbing, steady and unstoppable. Lerche watched his altimeter rise past 9,000 meters with no loss of control. It breathes differently, he thought. The turbo supercharger, that strange American invention, kept its power even in the thin air. Next came the dive test. All 3 planes lined up and plunged. Within seconds, the German pilots pulled back, their wings trembling, controls stiffening. The Thunderbolt, however, dove deeper, faster, and smoother than physics should have allowed. Lerche leveled out far below. Engine roaring, perfectly intact. The final test was endurance. For an hour, they flew formation patterns, switching throttle speeds. The P-47's massive engine consumed fuel greedily, yet it never overheated, never faltered. The German fighters, lighter and more elegant, began to show fatigue, oil pressure dropping, engines running rough. Back on the ground, Lerche's rivals looked puzzled. He simply said, "Ours are athletes. Theirs are machines." That evening, his report contained only one chilling line: "In a long war, we are building the wrong kind of airplane." March 20, 1944, Rechlin Airfield, Germany. The snow had melted into mud when the order came: simulated dogfight. P-47 versus FW-190 and Bf-109, observe combat behavior. For Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche, it would be the final and most dangerous stage of testing. He wasn't just flying, he was fighting. 3 aircraft taxied out onto the runway. The Luftwaffe pilots and their German machines smirked over the radio. "Don't worry, Hans," one said. "We'll try not to scratch your American toy." Lerche didn't answer. He pushed the throttle forward, and the P-47 surged ahead like a charging bull. At 3,000 meters, the mock battle began. The FW-190 dove first, its nose flashing past Lerche's canopy. Lerche banked sharply, the Thunderbolt responded slower, heavier, but when he leveled out, the Focke-Wulf was already struggling to match his dive. The P-47's immense weight became its weapon. It could drop like a stone and then pull out with brute strength. Next, the Bf-109 tried to climb above him and attack from the sun. Lerche countered by rolling hard right and throttling up. The American engine roared, its turbocharger whistling like a siren. In seconds, the Thunderbolt was level again, unbothered by altitude. The German pilot radioed, "Impossible. He's still climbing." After 20 minutes, the fight ended. None of the German aircraft could hold position long enough to shoot. Lerche, though sweating and exhausted, had remained in control the entire time. When they landed, silence fell across the field. One pilot broke it softly, "If they build thousands of these." Lerche nodded. "Then we will lose the sky." That evening, he filed his combat notes. The summary was brutally honest: in a duel, skill decides. In a war, endurance wins. The P-47 was built for war. Berlin wanted proof of superiority, Lerche had delivered proof of inevitability. March 23, 1944, Rechlin Airfield, Germany. The P-47 sat in the hangar, scarred from testing, its olive paint chipped, panels scorched from engine heat. Yet it was still ready to fly. That simple fact disturbed Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche more than any statistic. German planes demanded perfection, this one demanded fuel. The next phase of evaluation focused on damage tolerance. Mechanics deliberately fired small-caliber rounds into the aircraft's wing structure and fuselage, recreating the kind of punishments suffered in combat. When they inspected the results, disbelief filled the hangar. The bullets had barely penetrated vital systems. Oil lines were shielded by redundant piping. Control cables doubled in strength, and critical areas armored like a tank. Even the cockpit glass, a thick, curved bubble, withstood hits that would have shattered a Messerschmitt's canopy. Lerche pressed his hand against it and whispered, "They've built a bunker with wings." He compared it to the Luftwaffe's own designs. The Bf-109 was fast but fragile, engineered with surgical precision and minimal margin for error. The P-47, by contrast, felt agricultural, overbuilt, redundant, unapologetically heavy. And yet, in war, that simplicity was brilliance. Later that afternoon, engineers simulated hydraulic failures and severed control lines. The Thunderbolt stayed flyable. Its mechanical linkages, though primitive, allowed pilots to muscle through damage that would doom any German aircraft. That evening, Lerche wrote a single note in his logbook: "This machine is not elegant, but it refuses to die." When he shared his findings with Luftwaffe command, the reaction was silence. Pride prevented belief. But the truth was there, painted in dull American gray, standing unbroken amid the ruins of German precision. For Lerche, the realization felt heavier than the plane itself. The Americans weren't just building fighters, they were building survivors. March 25, 1944, Rechlin Testing Grounds, Germany. The hangar smelled of oil and graphite when Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche began his next inspection. This time, it wasn't about speed or armor, it was about the mind behind the machine. He wanted to understand how the Americans thought. He opened the side panels of the P-47 Thunderbolt, expecting chaos. Instead, he found order, clean wiring, labeled systems, quick-release bolts, and access points clearly marked. Every part seemed designed for replacement, not admiration. "Even a farmhand could repair this," one mechanic muttered. Lerche nodded. "That's the point." German aircraft were built like art: tight tolerances, delicate materials, perfect alignment. But each repair required master craftsmen, specialized tools, and time Germany no longer had. The Thunderbolt didn't care for any of that. Its simplicity was its genius. the electrical layout amazed him most. Circuits were separated and insulated so well that even if one system failed, the rest stayed alive. The control cables ran in pairs, protected by thick armor sheaths. They expect to lose parts of the plane in combat, Lerche realized, and still fly home. He noted another strange feature: standardized parts. Screws, clamps, and connectors were identical throughout the aircraft. What seemed crude was actually revolutionary. It meant any mechanic, anywhere in the world, could fix it. In his report, Lerche wrote, "They build planes as if they build trucks, in thousands, not in masterpieces." That afternoon, a visiting Luftwaffe colonel examined the Thunderbolt and scoffed. "Ugly," he said. Lerche replied quietly, "Yes. But it wins." When night fell, Lerche lingered by the plane's nose. He no longer saw a flying bathtub. He saw a philosophy, one that traded beauty for logic, and pride for survival, and for the first time, he envied it. March 27, 1944, Rechlin Airfield, Germany. The roar of the Pratt Whitney Air 2800 filled the morning air like thunder rolling over the airfield. For the first time, Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche wasn't just flying the P-47, he was dissecting its soul. The engine, larger than some entire German aircraft, fascinated him. It looked brutal, unrefined, and almost primitive. But when it ran, it sounded like inevitability. Lerche had the engine mounted on an open stand. Mechanics started it under supervision, and within seconds, the ground trembled. The propeller's blast whipped dust into spirals. The gauges held steady oil temperature, pressure, RPM, all balanced like clockwork. "It shouldn't be this stable," said a mechanic. Lerche didn't answer. He was staring at the turbocharger. That monstrous silver device, nearly the size of a man, was the P-47 secret. It allowed the Thunderbolt to breathe at altitudes where German engines suffocated. The Luftwaffe had tried turbo systems, but they were too complex, too delicate, too expensive. This one was simple, heavy, but unstoppable. He studied the materials: alloys, reinforced steel, heat-resistant coatings, all mass-produced, yet built to endure punishment. It wasn't art. It was industry. Then came the endurance test. The engine ran at full throttle for over an hour. Not a single leak. Not a flicker on the dials. At last, Lerche turned it off, and silence fell. He removed his gloves and touched the cowling, still warm, still alive. In his log, he wrote, "This is not an engine. It is a declaration of capability." That evening, he compared it with Germany's best, the BMW 801 and Daimler-Benz 605. Both were masterpieces: elegant, precise, temperamental. The American engine was the opposite: crude, resilient, forgiving, and for the first time, Lerche truly grasped the gulf between their nations. Germany built machines for pilots, America built machines for victory. March 30, 1944, Rechlin Research Center, Germany. After weeks of testing the Thunderbolt, Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche requested production data from intelligence reports. The folder arrived stamped Geheime Kommandosake, top secret. What he read froze him in place. The Pratt Whitney Air 2800, the same engine he'd studied, was being built by the thousands. In America, factories worked in 3 shifts, powered by endless fuel and labor. One plant in Connecticut produced 800 engines a month, another assembled propellers like toys on a conveyor line. Lerche compared that to Germany's figures: a few hundred BMW 801 engines a month, each requiring weeks of work and scarce alloys. The Luftwaffe fought with craftsmanship, the Americans fought with industry. Then he found a line that felt like a death sentence: Republic Aviation, P-47 production rate, 1 aircraft every 90 minutes. He stared at it in disbelief. While German aces risked their lives for every victory, 3 new Thunderbolts were already being built before they even landed. He wrote in his notes, "You cannot defeat a nation that manufactures faster than you can destroy." That evening, he showed the numbers to his superior. The man scoffed, "Propaganda. Lerche handed him a photo, a sea of engines stretching to the horizon. The colonel said nothing more. Lerche walked outside to the airfield. The captured P-47 gleamed under the floodlights, massive, unbending, unstoppable. In that moment, he finally understood. Germany's engineers were designing perfection, America's engineers were designing victory, and perfection, he realized, could never keep up with mass production. April 2, 1944, Berlin Air Ministry Archives. A sealed courier arrived at Rechlin that morning. Inside was a packet labeled Confidential, Western Front Air Operations. It contained Luftwaffe combat summaries, first-hand accounts from squadrons that had faced the P-47 Thunderbolt over France. Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche opened the file expecting exaggerations. Instead, he found despair. Reports described dogfights where German pilots emptied their cannons into Thunderbolts only to watch the American fighters roll away, smoke trailing, but still flying. One squadron claimed to have hit a single P-47 over 30 times before it crashed. 200 kilometers from the battlefield. There were patterns, the same phrases repeated again and again: impossible to destroy. Climbs after severe damage. Pilot survived. In one report, a German ace wrote bitterly, "Their machines return after taking punishment that would rip ours apart. We are artists. They are engineers." Another described the chaos of escort missions, hundreds of Thunderbolts swarming the skies around Allied bombers, diving through flak and fighters alike, pouring fire from 8 heavy machine guns. When one appears above you, the report concluded, you have already lost. Lerche closed the folder slowly. These weren't propaganda tales, they were official combat debriefings. The Luftwaffe was bleeding. He drafted his analysis that night, his words heavy with resignation. Our superiority in skill and tactics is nullified by endurance, numbers, and design philosophy. The American pilot fights with the confidence of one who knows his machine will not abandon him. When the report reached Berlin, it was quietly filed away. No one dared circulate a document that admitted the truth. The age of German air dominance was over, and the Thunderbolt had ended it. April 5, 1944, Rechlin Conference Hall, Germany. The long oak table was covered with blueprints and cigarette ash. Around it sat the brightest engineers of the Reich, designers from Messerschmitt, Junkers, and BMW. At the head of the table stood Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche, holding a thick folder marked Technical Summary, P-47 Thunderbolt. He began quietly. "Gentlemen, we've examined every bolt, every wire. It's not perfect, but it's invincible." The room chuckled until he laid out photos: the turbo supercharger, the reinforced armor, the massive R2800 engine. "Can we build something comparable?" he asked. The responses were hesitant. One engineer spoke first. "We can. In theory. But not in practice." Another added, "The alloys alone require resources we no longer have: chromium, nickel, tungsten. We're melting captured scrap just to keep production running." Lerche nodded grimly. "And the turbocharger?" A BMW technician shook his head. "We tried it. Too heavy, too expensive, too complex. Their factories build them like bicycles. Ours would take months." The truth hung in the smoke-filled air. Germany's brilliance couldn't match America's abundance. The Reich built wonders, but in small numbers. The Americans built power in endless waves. Lerche's final slide showed production statistics. "We can produce a masterpiece. They can produce 10,000 tools of war." No one spoke. Pride had turned to quiet dread. After the meeting, Lerche walked through the cold corridor, his boots echoing off the stone floor. He no longer felt the thrill of discovery, only the weight of inevitability. In his private notes, he wrote one sentence that summed up the day: "Our downfall will not come from the sky, but from the assembly line." June 8, 1944, Rechlin Airfield, Germany. Only 2 days had passed since the Allied landings in Normandy, but the front was already drowning in chaos. Reports poured into Rechlin, fragmented, desperate, unbelievable. Entire German divisions had vanished under endless air attacks. Every bridge, every road, every convoy had become a target. Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche sat in his office surrounded by dispatches stamped urgent. Most carried the same phrase, destroyed by fighter bombers. The codename repeated like a curse, P-47 Thunderbolt. One report described a column of Panzer IV tanks ambushed outside Cannes. Within minutes, thunderbolts swooped from the clouds, releasing rockets and .50 caliber fire that turned the armored beasts into burning steel. They came like thunder and left nothing, the survivor wrote. Another file contained reconnaissance photos, entire train yards reduced to ash, ammunition depots exploding under precision strikes. The Luftwaffe barely flew anymore, fuel was too scarce, pilots too few. The Americans owned the skies. Lerche stared at the photos of wrecked vehicles scattered across the French countryside. Each black crater looked like a sentence in a language he finally understood. This is what industrial war looks like. He remembered the words he had written months earlier: our downfall will come from the assembly line. Now he could see it playing out in real time. Every destroyed German tank was replaced by 10 new Allied ones. Every fallen P-47 was rebuilt, refueled, and back in the air before sunset. That evening, he walked out to the test field. The captured Thunderbolt stood in silence, wings streaked with rain. Once, it had been his puzzle, a challenge to understand. Now it was his teacher, his prophecy. He whispered softly into the wind, they did not just build an airplane. They built inevitability. July 2, 1944, Rechlin, Germany. The summer air was heavy with defeat. Trainloads of wounded soldiers arrived daily from France, their faces hollow, their uniforms caked with dust and smoke. Among them were Luftwaffe pilots, once the pride of Germany's sky, now exhausted, broken, and silent. Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche met them at the infirmary to conduct technical interviews for his reports. He expected excuses, maybe bitterness. What he heard instead was quiet resignation. One young pilot, barely 20, whispered, "We no longer fight them. We run." He described a mission over Normandy. His squadron of 6 Bf-109s attacked a column of trucks, but within minutes, 30 Thunderbolts appeared. The air turned white, he said. Their fire came from everywhere. I dived for the trees. Only 2 of us made it back. Another veteran, his arm bandaged and his eyes red, laughed bitterly. They don't fly like us, they fly like machines. They don't hesitate, don't break off. Even when hit, they keep coming. Lerche listened in silence. Each testimony confirmed what he already knew: the Luftwaffe's courage was unmatched, but courage alone couldn't fight endless fuel, endless planes, endless men. That night, in his logbook, he wrote, "The German pilot is still brave. But bravery has lost its value in a war of factories." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, not from a storm, but from Allied bombers pounding Hamburg again. He stepped outside, watching faint flashes on the horizon. The war no longer felt like a duel of skill or strategy, it had become an avalanche of steel and smoke. He turned toward the hangar where the captured P-47 Thunderbolt still rested, untouched. Once an enemy, it now looked like a monument. Perhaps, he whispered, we were never fighting their pilots. We were fighting their production lines. 1954, Munich, West Germany. A decade had passed since the collapse of the Reich. Hans-Werner Lerche, no longer a Hauptmann, walked through a quiet exhibition hall of the newly opened Aviation Museum. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust, familiar ghosts from another life. At the center of the hall stood, gleaming beneath soft lights, a restored P-47 Thunderbolt. The same type he had tested at Rechlin 11 years earlier. Its polished aluminum reflected his aging face, the faint wrinkles carved by time and memory. He walked closer, running his hand along the cool metal. A small plaque read, Republic P-47D Thunderbolt, built in 1944, restored 1953. Engine, Pratt Whitney R2800. He smiled faintly. The engine that once shook the ground of Germany now stood silent, a relic of power. Around him, visitors admired it with awe, unaware that this machine had once symbolized their nation's defeat. In the years since the war, Lerche had read the Allied archives. He learned how the Red Ball Express, American logistics, and industrial might had sustained an army of machines like this one, unstoppable, unrelenting. He realized that Germany's engineers had been trapped by pride, designing perfection while America designed endurance. A young student nearby asked, "Did this really win the war?" Lerche answered softly, "No. But it showed how the war was won." As he left the museum, the setting sun glinted off the Thunderbolt's wings, the same glint he had once seen over the skies of France. He paused at the doorway and whispered, almost to himself, "We built for glory. They built for tomorrow." And as the doors closed behind him, he understood that the true legacy of the Thunderbolt wasn't in its victories, but in the lesson it left behind. Power, when forged by purpose, endures far longer than pride.